Nisa Bula Vinaka. कैसे है and hello. हम लोग हैं एशा और कशिल and we are the bad Fiji gals. इसके मतलब है कि हम लोग के डर नहीं लगे कि कोई हम लोग के खराब बोले और जौन चीज हम लोग के मांगे पीछे रख के हम लोग तोड़ देगा. And most importantly, हम लोग मंगता ऑनर करे हम लोग के गिरमितिया ancestors जोन resist करीसरा colonial times पे. आज हम लोग एक दूसरा एपिसोड करेगा फॉर फीजी बात और एक एपिसोड बहुत स्पेशल है और हम लोग मांगता थैंक यू करे टू ऑल ऑफ आवर गेस्ट्स. तब सुनो, सीखो और एंजॉय करो. Vinaka Vaka Levu and thank you. A note to listeners. In today's episode, we will be discussing how oral histories and family stories are passed down, with a focus on Girmit descendants and histories from a Mandraaji or South Indian background. This episode also centers around people's lived experiences of being queer and those who self-identify as LGBTQIA and plus, and what that means for communities living in both Fiji and the diaspora. The episode does mention violence against queer people and communities. Bula everyone, my name is Esha and today we will be doing another episode for Fiji Baat. Today's guest is Salvin Kumar, and before we get into that, Kashil, do you just want to go ahead and say hi?
Yeah, bully everybody. I'm Kashil.
And today we will be talking with Salvin, who is a social worker, a writer, and author, and he does a bunch of other things. Who is currently based in Sydney, Australia. So we're gonna get into our first question. Salvin, can you please just go ahead and introduce yourself and whatever you want to share, like where you are based, what you are doing. Yeah, and thank you.
Thank you. Bula, Isha, and Kashel, Kaise hai and Namaskaram to you both. My name is Salvin, and I live and work on Gadigal land of the Eora Nation, and I'd like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land. I was born in Vitogo Village in Lautoka in Fiji. I did my primary school at Lovusangam, and then I went to Natambua to do my high school at Natambua High School. And then I did my degree at USP and moved to Australia in 2013. Um, yeah, so that's pretty much me. My family is still back in Fiji, my brother and my parents. I live here in Sydney, married to my partner. Um, yeah, and I've worked in numerous places here as well. I've done teaching here, I've worked in remote Indigenous communities as well, and now I'm a social worker. But I have my background in high school teaching. Yeah, so that's me.
Thank you for that introduction. Kishal, do you want to take on the next question?
Yeah, no, definitely. Yeah, Vanaka for being on the podcast, Salvin, and for that really awesome introduction.
Thank
So,
you.
we're just gonna ask some questions about oral storytelling and your identity. So, the first question is, how have family stories and sharing stories impacted your identity?
So we've always had this practice in our family where we would everybody would come together and sit in a circle, and my dada was usually the person who told us and shared stories with us, and these were usually anecdotes. So we weren't told, oh, this is our history, etc., etc. My dada would always tell us, short stories from here and there, and as I've grown older, I've now been able to put the pieces together and understand that, okay, this is where we started and this is how we've come along. My dada is my dad's eldest brother, and he passed away about 2 years ago. But now that I think about, when you're asking me this question, so sharing stories have these stories as they were shared have made me understand that yes, I have a South Indian identity. I am a Mandraaji, and I guess it gives me that power. It empowers me to to share the story with other young people who are coming up. I feel like I haven't answered that question properly.
No, I think you've answered it really well.
No,
Yeah,
it's nice. I think also something to point out is not all Indo-Fijians and like young people have access to these oral stories. So it's
yeah,
really good someone does, and the fact that you're talking about them and wanting to share them, it's a really beautiful thing, and it's a gift to other people in the community that
yeah,
don't have that access.
yeah.
Yeah.
I agree completely, and which is why I love the work that you guys are doing, because when I talk amongst my friends and we talk about where to access the knowledge. So documenting and putting these stories out there is something really great, and I'm really happy that you're doing the work that you're doing.
Well, Vanaka.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, sure, I'll let you
Um,
take the next one.
okay, cool. Yeah, I think what I'll add before the next question, to what you just shared, Salvin, and even you, Kashil, is when like for me, when like people come to me, they're like, "Wow, why are you talking about like Girmit history, or why are you talking about indentured labor
Hmm.
history? Like, how did that all start?" That's a very common question. It
Hmm.
always comes back to like these stories, and I'll just be like, I remember being younger, and even when I didn't know much history or stories about my own family, I just remember at gatherings or
Yeah,
when people were together, you would hear bits and pieces
yeah,
Mm.
of like different things, and like I think that really kicked it off for me. But yeah, I just think like our stories are so valuable. But yeah,
yeah.
I do think there is like this this thing about like not knowing your stories and not having the access, or our families talking about it, like that's also definitely a real thing.
Hmm. Hmm.
um but okay, so anyways, after that little thing that I just said, yeah, getting into more about like your specific identity. And another reason I really like I reached out to you, and I really wanted to interview you, Salvin, was
Yeah,
because of your Mandraaji identity and that
yeah,
history. Because even for me, um like looking into that history, that also has been another thing that specifically has prevented me from accessing my family stories and our
yeah.
histories.
Hmm.
So if you can just kind of, yeah, you can start off from wherever, but just talking
Yeah,
a bit more about being Mandraji and your Tamil
yeah,
history and
yeah.
identity.
Definitely, yeah. Thank you for that. So, what I do know is my great great grandfather, whose name was Kannan, came from India in 1905. So he then settled in the area that we live in now, Vitongo. And so his son was, whose name was Anjan, is how we have that Anjan Road in Vitongo in Lautoka.
Mm.
Um, so my my dad's mother's side of the family, they settled in Ba, and they call the area when I talk to my dada, when dada would tell us stories, he would say they referred to that place as Tanjavur Piri. And I've since looked up, what this means. So Tanjavur is a city in India, in South India, and it is the temple city because it has the biggest temple. And Piri sort of kind of like means departed or disunited, divided. And I thought, okay, so was the reason behind calling it Tanjavur Piri at that time, back in during Girmit, to say that you're extracted or disconnected from Tanjavur?
Mm.
Um, and so my dada has also talked about things like what we or the work that my ancestors did, and you say that they would work on stones and make statues for temples, and there would be, so stone statues are called sele in Tamil. um, yeah, and when I talked a little bit about anecdotes, and I said, okay, so yeah, so a lot of these stories would be shared with us, saying that, okay, so our great grandfather worked doing this, or did or great grandmother worked doing that. And through your stories, the ones that you've been sharing as well, A lot of things really align, and I'm like, oh yeah, this is something that I've been, talked to about before. So my great grandfather, whose name was Anjan, he was married to my great grandmother, whose name was Gangamma, but she had two husbands. So the second husband was Manikam. And this
Mm.
is something that's really, this is coming up, and we're talking about this, that, the ratio between men and women, and, men, a lot more men were brought in at the beginning of indenture because, they wanted more labor and all that. And then later on, they started to bring women, and the ratio was more men to women. And so it was quite common to have one woman married to two men.
Mm.
So that's my dad's side of the family. My mom's side is, so we've quite recently understood that they are Telugu, but they spoke Tamil as they were growing up. And the reason was my great grandmother on my mom's side, she was a younger woman when she arrived in Fiji, and her husband was an older man in his 40s. So he passed away quite early, and Party was, she spoke Tamil and she spoke Telugu as well. So she spoke Telugu to her Telugu husband who passed away, and then she brought up her children speaking Tamil because that was her mother tongue. So my
Right.
mother's side of the family has believed for a long time that they were actually Tamil because they spoke Tamil in the house. But
Right.
all the talis in the house, the tali, which is the necklace, like we have the Mangal Sutra for
Mm.
North Indian women. The
Yeah.
thali was the Telugu thali. So you have a Tamil thali, which is the two round things and then like an elongated piece in the middle. The Telugu thali is like a gold coin, and the Malayalam thali is like a heart shape. So my
Mm.
mom's side of the family, the women all wear Telugu thalis, and the pronouns used in the family also. So my mother called her dad Naina, which is the Telugu word for father,
Mm.
and they would call their grandmothers Awa. So it was quite about 10 years ago that we all were sitting down and having these, oral discussions, talking about family history and things like that. And then it came up that, oh, actually, this is like this. We're not um, that family speaks Tamil, but is of Telugu origin. So my dad's
Mm.
side of the family, they came from Bangalore, and we've heard stories that the great grandfather would always say, "Oh, we're Bangaloreans, from Bangalore." And my grandfather, who I remember as I was growing up, he and his mother would sing these. So in India, they're called Tevaram or Stotaram, and my grandfather would sing what is called, we would call that Totaram in our family. So these are Tamil devotional songs. And we even had, like, people coming from the radio to record my great grandmother and my grandfather singing. And these would be played in South India, in Sangam temples in Fiji. So when my grandfather, passed away, all this was a whole collection of books and audio cassettes that were donated to the library, to temples. Yeah.
That's amazing.
I know. Okay, Salvin, thank you so much for sharing all that you did, but I'm just so happy to hear you talking about this because so much of it like I've also seen in my family, but like all of
Yeah.
the stories and the knowledge you are providing, like this is so valuable,
Mm.
for I think like other people, who come from, the South Indian or Mandraaji like heritage in Fiji, but also those outside of Fiji and, I think even other Tamil people who come from indentured histories in other countries like South Africa or even
Mhm.
Southeast Asia, like there's so many similarities.
Oh yeah,
Um, yeah, so this
yeah,
has been really awesome that you're talking about this. Even like the whole thing, being of Telugu heritage but speaking Tamil, like that's also a real thing that happens quite
yeah.
often in our indentured communities.
Hmm.
Mm.
Yeah, and there's heaps of similarities. So now when I watch Tamil cinema, and because Tamil cinema sort of branches off from mainstream romance and how Bollywood has, romanticized storytelling in cinema,
Mm.
Tamil cinema shows a lot of the things that we still practice. So my father, for example, he didn't call his mother-in-law, Amma, he called her Atte,
Mm.
because that's the relationship, in which is different between North Indians and South Indians.
Mm.
That in-laws on so how do I explain this? Like my mother-in-law is not a mother in relation to me. She's my mami or my atta. Does that make sense? Or do you want me to explain a little bit more?
Maybe actually it'd be good to explain for people who
Yeah,
don't know. I reckon
Yeah.
it's just nice to break things down, and then it's there as a resource if people need that.
right.
Yeah. So I'll tell you, so I think an easier way to explain this and understand might be to compare it to the North Indian community. So in North Indian weddings, when North Indian weddings happen, um, the father-in-law and the mother-in-law on the other side, so the groom's mother and
Mm.
the bride's father, they can tease each other. They are not brother and sister.
Mm.
Right,
But in South Indian communities, the groom's father and the bride's mother are brother and sister. So there will not be any, you know, like teasing and joking between the
right.
two. And so it's the same as, so both in-laws are brother and sister in Tamil communities. So because
Yeah.
because my mother-in-law, in for that, following that example, would become my father's sister,
Mm-hmm.
I call her Ate, because she's my
Right.
dead sister. So Ate is the
Mm.
word for um, Fua. Yeah,
Mm. I see. That's really beautiful though, just to know that difference in languaging and the difference in customs.
yeah, yeah.
Right.
And even during funerals, I've noticed that there are things such as when the body is taken in a Hindu funeral, when the body is taken to be cremated,
Mm.
the coffin box is turned like three times before it is taken to the temple, the little temple, before the prayer. And I've seen that in a lot of Tamil movies as well,
Right.
which go into the villages and talk about the stories that are there in villages. So that's what I found really interesting, the similarities there. Yeah, but in North Indian like in how do I say this? In Bollywood, some of the things that's practiced in Bollywood is not practiced in Fiji.
Mm.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
It's a good point to make. On a weird side note, I remember going to a talk in Fiji, and the guy was Indo-Fijian, and he was saying that some of our weddings have been influenced by Bollywood, which I thought was funny.
yeah. It now is, but back in the day, there were there still are lots of practices that we still hold true to,
Mm.
historically, the identity that we've grown up with. But there are influences such as, I think, kicking the pot of rice,
Mm.
Mm.
and making the mark with red paints, so sindoor on the
Mm.
wall. Yeah, so those are, I guess, sort of like picked up from Bollywood.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
I just wanted to add the thing about Tamil cinema is very true.
Hmm.
I not that Tamil cinema does not have its own set of issues, but
Hmm.
Tamil cinema in general, like since I've started watching Tamil movies, like
Hmm.
it's just way better than anything I've ever seen in Bollywood. Like the stories are more developed, it's
Yeah.
more realistic.
Yeah.
And I like Tamil cinema because I actually get to see people who look like me and who look like, my family.
Yeah.
But I will say, like, even so, my like some of my like extended family members will watch, but my immediate, like, my parents only have just started watching Tamil movies, and it's when they're watching it they'll be like, oh, like that's what we do, or those are the
Yeah.
kinds of drums that we also play in our
Yeah.
family. And then that's when they, like, it's, to me, I find things like that very emotional, because it's like that's like the opportunity when they're seeing some sort of like connection to their South Indian heritage, like linking it back to South India. But yeah, so maybe like they might not understand the full context, but it's like they're at least seeing it somewhere, and they're able to learn like a bit more history on it.
Yeah. I completely agree. Yep.
Also, on a side note, I've always been told that Bollywood steals a lot of stuff from South Indian, like, do they call it like Tamil movies? Like they steal a lot of concepts and ideas. and they pump it
Yeah,
into Bollywood movies.
yeah,
Yeah, that's true.
yeah.
Mm.
A recent film that came out, excuse me, Lakshmi Bomb, I think it was called, and it's a remake of a film that came out ages ago, a Tamil movie which was called Kanchana, in which the main character is possessed by the spirit of a hijra, so a trans woman,
Mm. Yeah.
and the portrayal was really bad in the Hindi version, which was
Mm,
the character, the role was played by Akshay Kumar. Um, like, the whole thing about going back into things like, if you're telling a queer story, you need to have queer people tell
Exactly.
that
yeah.
story. Cis had men playing these roles, and it takes away from the narrative that brings the queerness with it.
Mm,
Mm. I guess it's like what Esha was saying about watching Tamil movies versus Bollywood movies and that difference there, like seeing people that look like you and actually come from your community.
Yeah,
And it's the same when you
yeah.
do that kind of shit with putting straight people or cisgendered people into roles that aren't for them. Like it's just like no. Basically for anything, you just let the community tell their own stories, and that's a great place to start.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, definitely.
Okay. Do you want to like talk anything more about like other family practices or like food and music? Up to you.
Yeah, so I touched a little bit about Totaram and Tevaram in my family, um, and I just want to so we have dose has been a wonderful thing in my family that my mother has taught me as well. My mother, I see her as like the dose queen. She goes to people's houses and she'd do the mix for them and say, okay, these are the quantities, and then you soak it overnight, and the next day you start making it. But people even call her to their places to say, okay, can you show us how to do this? So my mother is the dose queen. She also she also does these blends of masala, which I'm trying to talk her into telling me the recipe. Where when women have given birth, this particular masala is used to give them like bring their strength and energy back. um, so she would then she women in the community would say, call her up and say, oh, we've got a delivery happening, can you please get us the ingredients for the masala? And so my mother would then go to the market, and she smells all these things, and she puts them all together and says, all right, well, this is it. And then she pounds it and then takes them over, and that's what my mother does. So it's different from the yeah, it's got a very beautiful aromatic smell. I still remember that now, and I'm talking about, I'm getting goosebumps. But it's such a, and I'd always say, "Can I have some?" And she said, "No, this is not for you."
Oh
And there's this other thing which is called adarasam, which is like it's like a donut without the hole, um,
Oh yeah.
and then yeah, so and it's got sugar syrup on it. There's also payasam, which I make as well very nicely. There's avil, so there's an expectation when you go to a Mandraaji wedding that there will be payasam and there's going to be avil. So avil is like a stew with 9 different vegetables, and it's cooked in coconut cream.
That's making me hungry.
And there's this other thing called kolkote. Kolkote is rice and oh gosh, it's this beautiful thing that's steamed, and we offer it to the mother god to the goddess Mariam, and that my
Mm,
family prays to. Then we've got kulu. Kulu is again like it's similar to like a pudding, but not a pudding. Sorry, like a porridge,
Mm.
but it's
yeah.
not sweet. It's salty and soury.
Yeah, that's very good. I think I had Gulu for the first time just a few years ago, and it was in Lautoka. But yeah, it was after one of the
Yeah.
Mariamman, like the prayers had happened.
Ah,
Mm.
okay. Beautiful. Yeah, Kulu is just this amazing, it's got so many memories attached to it. We used to have Kulu when we were kids once a year because that would be, when we would do the prayers. And there's this one other thing that I want to quickly talk about, and it's called Wattal. So my dada used to talk about a practice that my ancestors did, where they would, if they've had goat, say for example, they've killed a goat, they've eaten most of the goat, they would hang like parts of the meat from the ceiling in the house, the mbure, and they'd let it dry and become like jerky, and then they would cut it into little pieces and then cook it with potatoes. And my dada, I've never tried it, but my dada always said that that was the most beautiful thing that you could ever eat.
I could imagine with the drying of the meat.
Yeah, that sounds very good.
Yeah.
I think I have to have a good feed after we finish that.
Same.
I was wondering, Salvin, where you live at the moment, can you get good Fijian Tamil food, or do you have to make it yourself at home, or wait till you go back to Fiji?
So some things I make myself, and you'll ask any Fijian that lives here, the fish never tastes like it's from Fiji.
Yeah.
So there's certain places that I've built a connection with. So there's a man down the road from where I live in the inner west who's from Fiji, and this was really funny when I went in, and I thought I didn't know whether he spoke Fiji Hindi or that he was Fiji Hindustani. So I was talking to him in English, and I was saying, oh, can I have some goat meat? And I said, oh, how wonderful is it that we have goat here in the inner west? And he said, where are you from? Because the inner west is predominantly Anglo-Saxon, and a lot of the Fijian community lives out western Sydney. So where I live, there's not a lot of Fijian people, but we've had a history here where Fijians first came when they arrived in Sydney. They settled in the inner west. So we've got a church down the road which was a Fijian Pentecostal church.
Okay.
Yeah. So anyway, I met this man, and I was like, "Oh, okay, can I have some goat meat?" And he asked, "So where are you from?" And I said, "I'm from Fiji." And he said, "To Hindi में सकता बात करे?" And I was like, "Oh, I'm sorry, but So he said, "Why don't you speak to me in Hindi?" So I said, "I'm sorry, I didn't understand, didn't think that you might be Indo-Fijian." But yeah, so I do have connections here and there. So if I want goat meat, I'll go to this person.
Mm,
There are restaurants here which sell um, like dosa and stuff like that. But
yeah.
it's different from the variety or the type that we eat.
Mm.
So it is slightly different. The taste, the flavors, it is different.
No, I agree. Fijian food's quite different. It's not exactly the same. The flavors come out different as well.
Yeah,
So
Yeah.
it's
yeah,
hard, like finding stuff that tastes like home
yeah.
when when you live outside of Fiji.
Yeah, definitely. So I try and recreate some of them. I call my mother and I ask her. I call my fua, my atte who lives in New Zealand.
Mm,
I'll ask her to tell me how to do this and that. So I try and recreate them. But going back to Fiji and eating food there, the aroma of the lovo
mm.
and all of that, you can never find it, elsewhere.
Yeah.
Salvin, you need a cookbook. You need to write a cookbook next, I think.
Maybe future project, yeah.
Honestly, though, I think that's another thing. Like, if you want to Google a Fijian recipe, it always shows up with like other variations or Indian stuff.
Yeah,
Even
yeah.
with like the more ipoke, like indigenous Fijian food, they'll show up with like Tongan or Samoan
Mm.
recipes.
Mm,
And like it's actually really hard to find good recipes for any type of Fijian food unless you're on all the Fiji Facebook groups.
yeah.
One or two and the elders, they'll always take pictures of like this is what we have for dinner tonight. Does anybody
Yeah,
want a recipe?
you can find it here. Yeah, I see them as well. A lot of the food is more in Brisbane, in Queensland,
Oh
because
wow.
the climate is similar to Fiji. This friend of mine was saying the other day, he had some katabaji. Um,
Mm.
I can never find it here. It's only the frozen variety that I get.
Mm.
Yeah,
Yeah. I find it hard cooking them like the frozen vegetables because there's so much excess of water and then I'm freaking
yeah,
out. There's just too much things happening. I'm like, oh no. So,
yes.
yeah, hopefully one day, fingers crossed, from children's book to a cookbook.
Yeah, yeah. That is actually something I have in my mind. I wanted to do four narratives which include a recipe, a
Mm.
dish that children can cook with their parents to
Okay.
create that connection and pass on the recipe.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
I think it's a really amazing thing because so much of our culture is also in the food that we make, and it's
Yeah.
so unique, the food that you find in Fiji. It's something that, you want to be able to keep passing on.
Yeah. Yeah. Definitely.
Oh, cool. Shall we move on to the next set of questions?
Yeah,
Yeah.
Okay,
let's
cool.
do it.
So the last time we were talking, Salvin, we were discussing you being a gay man and
Hmm.
coming out to your family and that whole experience for yourself.
Yeah.
We wanted to just talk about when it came to you understanding or learning more about your Gromit heritage and histories.
Hmm.
Were you like looking for your ancestors and their stories in these Gromit narratives, but ancestors who were queer? Because I know for myself, so
Hmm.
I'm bisexual.
Hmm.
Um, that's been like a huge thing for me, but also it's been like a place of trauma as well when I
Yeah.
can't find ancestors who are queer like me.
Hmm. Yeah. Yeah, I did want to hear stories like that. I wanted to know that that there are people who have similar experiences to me, but I didn't find
Mm.
anything. It was a lot later on until I came to read certain articles which talked about like same-sex relationships and how
Mm.
the colonial powers then um, talked about the behavior and made it very difficult for queer people or any queer relationships to exist.
Yeah.
I think there's been use of words such as sodomy is illegal. Or I can't remember where it was, but yeah, that was the only thing that I read. But that was a lot later on, like after I had come out.
Mm.
And no, I haven't. I did not hear any stories from our Gridmeet history that were queer stories at all at that time when I was growing up and looking for answers and stories and to understand my identity. There were
Yeah.
none.
Yeah, I think also for myself, like what's interesting is when we look at the Gromit history and having and only seeing ancestors who are like cis and straight, not
Hmm.
queer, was that it
Hmm.
didn't reflect the life that I was living and the Fijian friends that I have. So like all my
Hmm.
Fijian mates, we're all queer, and I'm
Hmm.
so used to that reality that
Right.
that's been quite startling for me, like not seeing that kind of yeah, just not seeing queerness and not seeing these queer ancestors represented in the history.
Yeah.
But I would argue that that's been done on purpose, like you
Yeah. Yeah.
said, through sodomy laws and through who's writing the history.
Yep.
We've been forced into a position where our histories have been made invisible.
Yep. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think what I will add to that, I think when it comes to looking for our queer ancestors, like that's been a difficult thing in the Fijian or the Indo-Fijian context, but I will say there has been lots of like literature and like writing and like things that have been like produced in the Caribbean context.
Mm.
Hmm.
I have seen a lot of that. And I think just for our listeners or even for myself, like if we can't find what we're looking for when we're doing the research or finding like stories in our families and like in our ancestors, I think building like relationships with other queer people in our life has definitely been very helpful.
Yeah.
So even for me, like being friends with other coolly queer people and
Hmm.
like talking to them about our history, but then like the queerness is definitely it's like a part of our relationships and our friendships, like that's been very important.
Hmm.
Mm.
And I'm sharing that because I definitely want you, Salvin, to also share about like the community-based stuff that you're doing and bringing like other queer people, specifically of Fijian descent or who are from Fiji, together. So if you kind of just want to like talk more about that, that would be really nice.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And I completely agree with you guys. Going back to what you just mentioned, these narratives were deliberately not told. And there is this connection in the community that as soon as I see somebody who's from the diaspora or who has a Girmit history, and they are queer, like instantly I'll send them a message and I'll say, hey, amazing work here and there, and how can we connect? What can we do?
Mm.
So it was actually after I got married that I started getting messages from people from America, from Canada, from different places where people that look like me live.
Mm.
And they're all saying things like, wow, we're so proud of you, your family has accepted you. So just a bit of context: I got married in 2019. My I came out to my family in 2015, and then it was a whole journey where my family accepted me and came to my wedding. um, and I had like a full on, I had 3 days of, and I wanted that. I wanted to have a Sangeet and, haldi. I
Mm.
wanted to have a traditional Hindu wedding, and I wanted to have a, Western reception. So I started getting messages from people. And so since then, the work that I do, the activism that I do, is to empower, uplift, and amplify the voices of queer people from Fiji. And I know that there is an advantage that I'm living in Australia, where there are laws that protect me, but there's not enough protection, or there is no protection for people who are queer living in Fiji. There
Mm.
are laws, but you see in the community there's so much discrimination. And
Yes.
so because of that, I wanted to start a network, because I do know that there are networks, but there is still a racial divide. There is still a divide, you know. Like the Indo-Fijian queer community has their own little circles and groups, and the Itoke queer community has their own, circles and groups. So you've got the Auntie Senikau pageant, and then you've got the Indo-Fijian queer community that supports themselves by dancing at weddings, doing decorations, and doing henna and all that. But
Mm.
you'll hardly see them coming together into one, um, under one, event or organization and things like that. There have been efforts to bring them together, and so that's why I wanted to start a group. So I've got a closed group on Facebook, which is open to all races, and it's all about equality and allowing people to have an opportunity to voice their opinions and speak. So it's called Global Queer People of Fiji. um, and there's things that we look at in that group. We look at mental health, so we try and reduce isolation. And the program that I've rolled out last year in December, which is going pretty well, it's called Queer Dost, which essentially is about connecting two people so that they can check up on each other and say, hey, how's it going, how are you
Mm.
feeling today, can I talk to you about this and that. So it's about creating that connection, because there is a lot of isolation, there's a lot of disconnect in the queer community from parents and society as a whole, because we come from a people that always say, what will auntie from this
Mm.
area say, what will uncle from Suva say about you being queer.
Yeah.
You've always got that kind of thing coming, and
Mm.
attacking you in a way. So I
And I
wanted to create that connection. Yes, sorry.
Oh no, sorry. I was just gonna say, and I also think with being queer, like you're always coming out in different ways. Do you know what I
Yeah,
mean?
yeah,
Obviously, like we live who we are in our identities, but you tell family members and you finally come out, and then it's kind of like you're coming out in different. I don't know how to explain it properly. My words. Sorry, I've been working this morning. Um, but it's like, so I'll tell my family, but then they'll tell somebody else, and maybe I'm not ready to tell them because
yeah,
I don't know if they're safe or not for
yeah,
them to know my, like, my identity.
yeah,
So there's all these issues with different family members, extended family members, and wider community circles in Fiji
yeah,
where um, once it's out, you're not in control of who's knowing and your safety, and that's a
yeah,
really big issue in Fiji. And I see a lot of people struggling with that a lot. It's
yeah.
a lot to do with mental and physical safety.
Hmm. Yeah, I completely agree. And so I encourage whoever I speak to, if they are still not out, if you know that it's not safe, don't come out.
Mm.
You only do it
Right.
when you know that it is safe. If you are at risk of, becoming homeless, don't come out. You like, I guess, Kishel, you're sort of going into this idea that was floating around about inviting people into that, like not coming out but coming in,
Mm.
and having those selected people who know about your identity.
Mm.
And
Right.
when it comes to the network that we have, where people tell, because people talk. For me, for me, it sort of it was what I wanted to have. Like I just wanted everybody to know, and that's it. And just let's move on.
Mm,
Like, be done with it. You want to ask me
Right.
3 questions? Ask me 3 questions. You want to ask me 15 questions? Ask me, and be done and over with it. I don't want to have to
Right.
explain things over and over again.
mm. I think for myself living in Aotearoa, I have so many more freedoms and so many more privileges as a queer person, and I
Hmm.
can't imagine like how much more complicated it would be to navigate my queerness in Fiji, especially in a place where Bainimarama openly stated that he wanted to send, or
Hmm.
what did he say? He wanted to send all the gay
I think he
people.
said like to Iceland or something.
Yeah,
He's yeah, like
like
if you're not fitting the norm, you can get out. Like,
exactly. Like we've got this constitution, right, that states that we want to also protect the queer community and trans people, non-binary people.
yeah,
um, but then it's not reflected actually with how things play out in Fiji.
yeah,
And I remember there was a video circulating around social media recently where there were um there were visibly queer people, people that cannot hide their queerness, and they
yeah.
do not have that
Hmm.
that's something that they are not afforded the same way that maybe I can do that, right?
Hmm.
Mm.
um and I believe that they were trans women as well, and they were
Right,
just being ridiculed. And
right.
you could see a whole I think it was at a I want to say it was at a sports game. I don't know
Yeah,
the specific details, but it was circulating very fast around social
yeah,
media. But the confidence that they had, they were just flaunting it. They're like, "Go fuck yourselves!" Like, this is
yes.
it was amazing. But I think that's it's a really hard position to put people in our communities. Like
Yeah,
there needs to be more support. So it's really great hearing that you have a network like
yeah,
that you've started, because to be honest, like for the people that are queer within our communities, there's just not enough support. There's a lot
Yeah.
of death by suicide for queer
hmm,
people,
Mm.
and
hmm,
especially trans people in Fiji,
hmm,
and it's heartbreaking. Like it's really heartbreaking. Yeah.
yeah. Oh, I agree. And on social media, you'll see this that as soon as there's some news about the queer community, every every person who has access to Facebook will start commenting. You'll
Mm,
see that
Mm.
news about other very important things in in what's happening in the community, which is posing imminent danger to people. People won't talk about that. But as soon as you have a photo of a queer person doing activism, everybody starts quoting the Bible as if they know it back and forth.
Right.
um,
yeah.
and it's just so damaging, which is one thing I wanted to mention here to people who are listening. If you're not queer, the statements you make against the queer community are very, very damaging, especially for people in positions of power like Bainimarama. When
Mm,
he
Mm.
said that, and that was just around the time when the marriage equality debate was going on
mm,
in Australia. And it was a difficult time. We would, like, there were times when I would go into the city and there would be flags and banners which would say yes for marriage equality. And a bunch of teenage boys on that day that I was there were walking down the road and they were like, it's okay to say no to gay marriage. And I'm the being alone in that space, it's quite a scary situation.
mm,
um,
Yeah.
and also, when a person like Bani Marama makes a statement like this, people who follow, or we've got this thing in our community where we listen to people who are in positions of power. So a person who is a doctor, um, a medical doctor, is often, not often, is always given a higher place in the Fijian community.
Yeah.
So people listen to these people who are in positions of power. And so I'm urging, if you are that kind of, if you have power, please don't make statements that make lives, difficult for queer people. We're already
mm,
struggling. We're already trying to be visible and trying to
Mm.
find equality, find work, and be treated equally.
mm, exactly. Yeah.
Thank you for sharing all of that, Salvin. I think it's really important for all of our listeners to hear, regardless of where they are based right now.
Mm.
Thank you.
I think it's definitely one aspect within our histories that we're like yet to fully embrace. And I wanted to ask real quickly, Salvin, do you feel that because Fiji is quite a religious country, whether that be Christianity,
Mhm.
Hinduism, Islam, do you think that religion has had a very big impact on anti-queer sentiment in the country?
I do think, yes, that religion has had a big impact. But if you separate, what is being talked about, because, when religion talks about um, what is right and what is wrong, there's a whole list of wrongs. I feel like just queerness is, sort of magnified under this lens that people look at, what's wrong and what's right in community.
Mm,
Mm.
And yes, I do agree that religion has had a huge impact. Yep.
yeah. Yeah, I see it as well. Like I've heard family members discuss things, we have to sit down and chat about it. And I'm just like if God loves, like there's the whole thing about the notion of you can't get into heaven and things like that. I'm
Mm.
like, well, God should love all of their children, right?
Hmm.
So it's like,
Yeah.
how do you quantify that because you're straight and this person's queer, that's that's their value, that's how much they're loved. I would call bullshit
Yeah.
all of
Well, you know what? It's they know that it's not God who doesn't love them. It's like the immediate people around them that doesn't
yeah.
love them.
Yeah,
Yeah.
That's what's
that's a good
happening.
way of putting it. It's more these notions that they've internalized is actually more of I feel like it comes from this idea of what will people say. I guess it's not
Mm.
because
Mm.
actually look at our scriptures and things like that, or even if we go like if we think about our communities pre-colonization, so whether that be for Itoke people and colonization and the conversion to Christianity, or coming from the
Mm.
subcontinent with the British, or even Brahminical supremacy, like these things were normalized in our communities, and that's another thing like we need to keep discussing, like
Mhm.
this idea of straightness, or just like straight, a cis man and a cis woman being together, that's actually
Mm.
only been in history for a really short space of time.
Mm.
Mhm.
I was looking, like me and a friend were discussing this recently. So this notion of being straight, and that's only, yeah, it's only existed for X amount of hundreds of years, where
Mm.
actually having queer people and queer histories has been around for forever.
Yep.
Yeah.
If I can just add a few more things here,
Yeah.
we're talking about, or are we going to talk about heteropatriarchy in a bit, or have we sort of covered this?
I think if you want to, I think that could be good. Maybe more in
Yeah.
the sense of like the ideal relationship, or do you know what I mean? Like even outside of just two people getting together, so many people in the queer community have open relationships, multiple
Yeah.
partners.
Yeah.
Some people don't have partners,
Hmm.
and our community is really fixated on marriage.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like it's to the detriment of people as well.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. I think a lot of that is like, we're lifting templates from the straight community sometimes without even realizing that we're
Mm.
living up to, behaving in a way where we're fitting the norm.
Mm,
I guess that kind of validation comes in when we say, okay, marriage, the sanctity of marriage, and all that kind of stuff. I've had a person ask me once, they said, so who's the man, who's the woman in the relationship, what do you do
Yeah.
in the bedroom, and like this was a heterosexual man who was asking me
yeah,
these questions. But yeah, the thing is, being in a closed or an open relationship is entirely up to the couple.
mm,
Mm.
And I, for one, don't think that there's anything wrong with being in an open relationship. That's expression, and that's who
Yeah.
you want to be. And in saying that, if people are thinking that marriage is the end goal, I don't think that that is the way it is for me. I think
mm,
that
Right.
I've embraced myself, I've loved myself, and I am happy, very happy with who I am. And before I found Scott and I got married, I was very, very happy in a being single.
yeah,
So
Yeah.
I don't want people to think that because I've gotten married and I'm settled and I am happy, that I'm glorifying marriage and that is the end goal. No,
Mm,
it's
Right.
not. It's, I think that acceptance needs to come first. You need to fall in love with yourself, respect yourself, and, empower yourself before you can give love to anybody else.
mm, mm.
Mm,
I think also just to add on to that, like a lot of queer people live quite different lives to straight people. Like this is talking
yeah.
about me and my friends, but our goal is to have like a piece of land and all live together.
Yes.
I think there's a difference between queer friendships versus straight friendships. The love
Mm.
is
Yeah.
quite different. I'm not trying to like shit on other friendships, sorry. But
But what you're saying is true.
yeah, the openness
Yeah,
is so different. The love, I feel like, um, even the way we move through conflict, like it's so different.
yeah,
And it's like I have actually so many different life partners, and I don't need to be tied up with them as like a couple. And
yeah,
that's actually
Right.
like the way I want to live my life. Like I want to live my life communally and with the people, all the people I love and care about. I I think in a big way that's like a really queer thing.
yeah. No, I completely agree. I think a lot of it has to do with the struggles that we've gone through. And because we look at another queer person and we know that, yeah, what it's like. How
Mm,
hard it is to exist and to survive. And, it also
right.
then amplifies and translates into other, when we see other people who are descendants of Girmitiyas, we know that we have that kind of resilience. We have that in our DNA, in our yeah, like, it runs in our veins, sort of like that kind
Mm,
of that strength. And we see other people like that, and we connect with them instantly. And so I
Mm.
completely agree, and I know that connection. You see yeah, like I've been clubbing sometimes, and I found a queer person from Fiji, and we'd just be like, "Oh my God, you're from Fiji!" Like that scream and that connection, and then we've established a friendship since then. So yeah,
Mm.
that is so true.
Yeah, it's
That's cool.
I'm glad more people are starting to talk about this, like queerness and friendships, and how it's just like, yeah, it's very different. And so it's nice, and you know what, like Vanaka, for the both of you, like to have this conversation, because I think like this is just super important to be talking really openly about queerness and what that looks like for us.
Yeah. And I
See,
thank you
No,
both as well
definitely.
for allowing this conversation to happen.
mm.
Yeah.
Oh, stop! You're gonna make me cry now. um, I'm wondering where add Isha. Do you want to take this number C?
Sure, sure, sure. I'll take that. I think what add, just like really quickly before I move on to our next question is, for the folks listening, like I honestly don't know, like I really don't know, who or like what backgrounds like the actual people who end up listening to these full episodes are, but I just think it's really like valuable that we're talking about this because I think for queer folks who are at different parts, like different parts in their lives, or maybe they haven't fully like told like everybody, or they haven't even told one person or whatnot. I think just even listening to this can be really validating. So yeah, just another additional round of thank yous from my
Mm,
side.
Thank
maybe
you.
um
Isha, we should put up some queer support groups
I
for
Yeah.
think so.
it
I
might be
think
good.
so.
People need to reach out to anybody
Yeah.
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 because what we've been
um
discussing is very true. The sense of isolation that exists for queer Fijians, and yeah.
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 Okay, so our next question, coming back to like Girmit and like being queer as well. You talked about this last time when we had spoken our first video chat, but if you just want to kind of like give a little background and context for our listeners, but like everything that has to do with tirakutu and
Mhm.
what that dancing means, for people who participate and at the temple, and just like what's your feeling or like your ideas around like queerness and like belonging with that specific history.
Yeah. So when I was asked whether there were queer stories in our Gilmit history, there were none when I thought about it, when I tried to look for it. But then when I thought about Tirkuttu, so Tirkuttu is street theater, and it is practiced as an art form where people dance and tell stories. Um, so it is quite male. It is a very male dominated dance
Mm.
form. I have seen women's groups during Sangam tournaments in Fiji. I have seen women's groups, but it is mostly um, the men who do this dance form. Um, and so there would be roles of mother goddesses or the queen, the Rani, and these will be played by men.
Mhm.
And I'd be sitting there and watching it, and my mother would say, "Oh, look at the Rani's, sari. It's so beautiful. It's so gorgeous. Or her hair looks really, thick and nicely braided." Um, a lot later on, I thought, this is like that was empowering for me to understand that there was a sense of non-binary existence.
Mm.
um,
Mm.
and so I really admired that. And as I grew older, then I started seeing more, trans women and queer people in Fiji taking up these roles and performing. There was a lot of, comic behind their speech delivery, but it was still, they were still visible, they were still coming up, and they were still like playing these roles. And I remember watching a performance, and now that person is a wonderful friend of mine. But that was really empowering to see that this is acceptance, this is culture, this is tradition that it is living through. And so Tirukuttu tells stories of Hinduism, and a lot of focus and a lot of the stories come out of the Mahabharata. And in the Mahabharata, you've got Shikhandi, who Shikhandi is the queer person that we've read about in ancient history in Hinduism. So it then I started to read more and understand and go through that path, through religion and through Tirukuttu and through these practices, to understand that there are existence, or there are queer people in history. Like
Mhm.
Esha, I think you've mentioned this before as well. And also in Sangam temples, you'll usually have a temple dedicated to the goddess Mariamman.
Mm.
And I've seen this recently when I've traveled to Fiji for a holiday during puja time. The queer community comes out in their numbers, and they'll
Mm.
have
Mm.
their non-binary like outfits, because
Mm.
they'll wear a shirt, they'll wear a sari at the bottom, and then they'll throw a veil on their shoulder. And that, like, it is fantastic, and they'll be leading the
Mm.
prayers, they'll be in front there, welcoming the mother goddess as she comes, draping her in these beautiful beautiful saris. And that, to me, is that's something really empowering. And I think that has started a journey which can see more inclusion of the queer community in the practices that we have, in things that are we identify with, or our identity.
Right.
Mm.
Yeah.
Just like normalizing it more in the house, right? Like more in the home setting, not just in these like big festival settings as well.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And I hope that filters out into home settings as well.
Mm.
Mm.
And we know, as from Fiji, we give a lot of power and a lot of value to people who are up there in religious settings. So priests and
Mm.
pastors and all these people get a lot of value. We touch their feet to ask for blessings.
Mm.
So to have queer people there on that platform is very powerful for me. I
Mm.
feel that that is like the beginning of a journey that, hopefully, like you said, Kishel, filters into households, and there can be respect, and there can be more acceptance there.
Mm. Yeah, just normalizing these conversations and talking about it more, even just the three of us sitting down and chatting about it.
Mm.
Hopefully that even makes moves towards just normalizing that yes, there are queer people in our community, and yes,
Yeah.
they deserve, human decency and respect like every other person.
Oh yeah, yeah. It'll be a whole day of talking if we talk about the struggles that the queer people face.
Yeah.
um, but just saying it as simply as respect and acceptance and inclusion, we
Mm.
need that.
No, definitely we do. We need that. Okay. So that was wonderful. So we're going to move into the next sections of questions, and
Mhm,
this is really exciting. We just wanted to chat about Fiji Baat. So
mhm.
that is the children's book that you made,
Yeah.
and so it'd be really nice to just know the background of how this all came together. How did you like come up with the idea that you wanted to yeah, make a children's book, and
Yeah.
why you want to call it Fiji Baat?
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you. That's a wonderful question. I'm so excited to talk about Fiji Baat. Fiji Baat is my baby. It's so I had I've been working on a book for about 2 years, and come COVID, I had more time to devote to that book. So I had finished my first draft, and I had put it away. And so I had a lot of free time because I had set my body clock as such that I was writing it till 12 at night or waking up at
Mm.
5 o'clock and writing, and so I was idle. And so I thought, okay, um, maybe I want to do something else. And there was this one day during COVID when my cousins, we were all doing a video chat from all over the world, Canada, America, Indonesia, where I have cousins living. And so everybody was getting members of their family to come and say hello. So people or young people were coming to the camera and saying namaskaram. And I could see people in the group like smirk or have this smile as soon as they'd hear an accented namaskaram,
Mm.
and the children would become really shy and run away. And so I thought, well, what are we doing? What's happening here? Like, we've got young people who are growing and trying to embrace their identity by saying repeating the greeting that their parent is asking them to say, but where are we laughing at them because they've got an accent? And so I thought
Mm.
these young people would really have a huge struggle, you know um, connecting to their identity. And then I thought, okay, well, I'll write a book about this. So then came the idea to write Fiji Bath, and I wanted to show, the whole being a marginalized person when you move overseas, the struggles, the added layers of your intersectional identity, when you are struggling to learn your language and then you are learning English,
Mm,
and the importance that English is given in these Western countries. That's a whole different thing, and
yeah.
assimilation again happening, and culture loss. So I wanted to start the conversation not where a person had passed their teenage years, because there's research that is saying that people from multicultural communities move overseas, and they feel disconnected from their culture, and
Mm.
eventually after their teenage years or when they go to university is when they start to feel that they need to reconnect.
Mm,
Right.
So I was having a conversation with a cousin who is born here, and I was saying, okay, I'm going to give you a few questions. Tell me what you think. So then I sat down and I thought, okay, I've got the information, and now I'm going to write down. And Fiji Bath really is my tribute to my community and my culture.
mm,
Um, the South Indian languages. I think Romitesh has mentioned this before in one of the previous
mm,
podcasts. Is dead in Fiji. We don't really have people who speak Tamil, Telugu, and Malayalam. And so I wanted to document that. I wanted to put that down. I wanted to put down the fact that I have that the South Indian community has come from Madras, has says namaskaram or vanakkam, and calls their father appa or calls their mother
Mm.
amma or naina or whatever. I wanted to start that conversation. I wanted to start that early, and I wanted to also kind of put the idea out there that our languages are important. And also at that time I think I was seeing a lot of debate on social media about Fiji Hindi
mm,
not being
Mm.
a valid language, and it is, and somebody had said that it is broken Hindi, and I was like, oh my gosh, like if it is broken Hindi, that means it needs to be fixed, so my identity needs to be fixed. No,
Mm.
that's not true. um, so I wanted to put it out there. And the reason I called it Fiji Bath, because I wanted it to be as close to the language itself.
yeah.
Mm.
We have people who, older people who go to younger people and say, Fiji Baat karta,
Mm,
which means,
Yeah.
do you know, do you know Fiji Baat?
Mm.
Um, so yeah, that's why I wanted to use that as the title.
Which I think is actually just like it's a really words have so much meaning, and Fiji Baat like that has it's super significant because I think when we say Fiji Hindi,
Hmm.
there's this idea again what you were just discussing, this notion that it derives just from Hindi, which it
Yeah.
doesn't, and that it's broken, and what you're
Hmm.
talking about, this idea of it needing to be fixed. And honestly, I even hear some of my elders talk about this. Like they carry a lot of shame for not speaking, they say pure Hindi or proper
Mm.
Hindi.
Hmm.
And we've this has affected our community because of Hindu nationalism, because of
Mm.
older people that have held on to these sentiments that our language isn't proper.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I just think that it's a very powerful thing to be like, no, this is significant. This
Yeah.
is what it is. This is Fiji Bath. Yeah.
Mm. Yeah, absolutely. And not just language. A lot of when we move overseas, when we make friends with other people who are from India, and they'll say, "Oh, why are you doing it like this? Why are you eating like that?
Mm.
Why are you talking like
Yeah.
this?" It doesn't sound good. It's not. And yeah, so I wanted to I wanted to break away from that chain. I wanted us to stand up and say that this is my identity. This is my language. This is the way I speak. Yeah, so I wanted young people to start that conversation, and so it has been happening. I've got feedback from people who are saying that young people are calling their grandparents and talking to them on the phone and saying, hello in their own languages. So yeah, that was what I wanted to do, my tribute to my culture and identity, and I feel like Fiji Bath has, yeah, been doing that.
That's amazing.
It's a huge deal for the community to have a book, and on top of that, a children's book for this.
Mm,
Thank you. It really warms my heart to hear this. And I did want, I wanted to do something for the young people. And it was, there's, lots of things that are happening, that happened in the creation of Fiji Bath. So
mm,
another thing was parents not listening to their to children. When children
Mm.
say things, parents say, "Oh, bada jan ke baat hai, tum nahi bolo," like it's for older people, not for you to have this conversation.
Mm.
Not because the conversation is inappropriate, but because allowing young people to speak sort of was, in this community that we're from, a culture where you're empowering young people, and that shouldn't happen. Young people should always respect older people, should never talk back. Yeah.
Mm.
Well, I think this is a really great thing to mention, and this is actually a huge issue that we're seeing right now, especially with young people accessing, Gurumit history or the language.
Hmm.
Um, it's a lot to do with the gatekeeping from certain older people within the community. For
Mm.
example, the Gurumit Council, it's just a bunch of old men. Like,
Mm.
and
Mm.
you see
Yeah.
the building and that space not being used specifically because they've shut out young people. They don't want to have young people in leadership. So
Yeah.
I think and like to be honest, if we want our culture to flourish, we need young people. We need to support them, and we need to allow them to step up and help them, even if they do make mistakes. That's fine. They're young. That's
Yeah.
what happens. And I think it's just really awesome to see something that centers, kids and their experiences because we
Mm.
don't talk about that enough in our community.
Yeah. And also sometimes, the really older people in the family, they're not given an opportunity to participate in activities. They're always seen as,
Mm.
less mobile. Put them on a chair in the corner,
Yeah.
give them their
Yeah.
tea and let them do whatever or watch TV all day. But that's not really helpful. These older people who are, much, much older in their 60s and 70s have a wealth of knowledge.
Yes.
The conversations they hold in their minds, like I said, anecdotal, stories that come out, and they hold so much information. My
Mm,
my dada used to talk about the passenger. It was like a cart, and people would sit on it, and like in the mornings, it would start from Ba and come towards Lautoka. So there would people would get off this passenger train and go and visit their families, and then in the afternoon the train would go back, so you'd go back and ride on it. So my dada would tell us a story about an incident about a time when one of the relatives had to go relieve himself, and he missed the passenger train.
Mm.
So like that anecdote holds for me so much information, like the passenger train or the practice of leaving from bar in the morning, visiting your families.
Right.
Yeah, so the thing then there also was that older people have a wealth of knowledge.
Yeah.
Speak
Mm.
to them, learn your languages. I've lost my grandparents now, they've all passed away, but I wish if I
Mm.
had them around, I would get my grandfather to teach me the thotarams that he used to sing.
Mm.
Right, right. No, I agree with you on that. I think even for me, like, so yeah, none of my grandparents are alive anymore, but when they were, I was much younger.
Hmm.
And it was at that point I didn't even know like what questions to
Mm.
ask or where to start. And it's like now when I look back and I'm just like, man, I wish I could have asked them so much. And I
Yeah,
think another point that both of you had touched upon, like young people and especially like children are not really encouraged to be a part of these conversations. But then you have people in our grandparents generation who can share that knowledge, but it's like that middle range, that middle group
Yeah.
yeah,
that like shuts everybody out and
yeah.
like controls a lot of like the narratives that we keep
Mm,
running into in our communities.
yeah.
I think what I really love about being back home in Fiji, and it's a part of my own upbringing as well, is that a lot of the young children are looked after by their grandparents.
Mm,
Mm,
One of my favorite things is that when I go back home, I spend a lot of time just with my elders, and you can see this joy. They really do want to pass on their stories, and they just want to tell you about their life and the things that they've seen. And um, yeah, I think that's probably by far one of my favorite things to do back home. And even like the neighbors, sometimes they're not directly related to you, but the
yeah,
elders they just want to sit down and they want to have a talanoa with you. And
yeah.
sharing
yeah,
our stories is such a big part of who we are, and I think that's really beautiful that you could capture that in a book with a child and talking with their grandparents.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. And I wanted to also use like we've got technology, we've got power, as in we
mm,
we are able to access a lot more things than we could. We're able to document a lot more things than we could, and we're
right,
able to communicate and have better connection than we used to. In the past, people would write letters, but now we've got the ability to do a video chat. So I
yeah,
wanted to bring that all together, and I'll like tie that in. And yeah, so this is now a Fiji Baat is a series. So I'm writing the second one, and I'm doing the illustrations for the second one too.
Oh my
Um,
goodness, do you mind I'm just touching on the illustration aspect, because that's
yeah,
amazing. Like a lot of people will just write the book but they wouldn't also do the illustrations
yeah,
and creative labor, which that's such an amazing thing. And to be creative is a big part of our culture too. So
yeah.
mm,
cool to hear about that process as well.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I had actually forgotten that I could do some art. So this is the story is a little sad, but I'm going to tell you really quickly. When I was 15, 16, I was doing a lot of artwork. Like I would paint and then I would send it over to family, and I would even participate in like school competitions. And I had really deep and dark, stuff dedicated to women, marginalized women, torn
Mm,
between
mm,
mother and child. It was too strong for my high school community to understand at that time. But the backlash that I got was art is queer.
right,
mm,
So I was told that the reason I'm doing it is because I'm probably a faggot.
mm,
mm,
And I remember that day really well. I had gone to an art exhibition in Nandi, and when I returned, there was this huge thing about why did you go? Is it because you want to hang out with the gay people? You want to hang out with the Tangauris?
mm,
mm,
So it like shut down that whole thing. Like I stopped doing art.
yeah.
So when I wrote Fiji Bath, I thought, okay, so I need to probably, get some illustrations. And then I started looking for illustrators. And then I thought, oh, actually, hang on a minute. I could do artwork myself. So why don't I give it a try? So then I did it, yeah, and yeah, so I did those the ones for the first book, except for the cover. The cover is done by a wonderful person called Ellen Steven. So even
mm,
a lot of the things around getting Fiji Bart together, I wanted to commission people in Fiji to do, say, the cover page,
Mm,
the
right,
layout. I commissioned another person in Fiji to do the layout. I printed 2 batches, one in Australia and one in Fiji. And around the time of COVID, I wanted to put money there, however little it was. I wanted to put money into the economy in Fiji. So the money is still there, and I'm going to, when I do my second book, I'm going to use that money to do part 2 of Fiji Baat.
That's really cool.
That's very cool.
I was just wanted to say real quickly about the stuff that you're discussing, like that story that you shared with us about this idea that was being like told to you that art represents like being effeminate, and that's
Mm-hmm.
not, that comes from this notion that it's not an ideal form of masculinity, and that's like
Mm-hmm.
real stuffed up. Like, that's definitely linked to toxic masculinity,
Oh yeah, yeah, yeah,
how that's actually rampant in the community.
yeah.
And I think that these notions and ideas, you see it feeding through into things like when the Fiji Baat language debates were happening. Esha, you'll remember this. Some of the people were talking about this on the podcast. Um, it was men defending proper Hindi, but then it was women
Yeah.
defending Fiji Baat. And it's real
Mm,
interesting that you brought up the art stuff, because it just seems like all these things that come from our culture, whether that be language, food, creativity, it's being put into this category of like bad, and there are these forms and these ways that they'll represent it as being bad or something that we shouldn't access.
mm,
Like Ash has talked about this in the past, but this notion of like cleaning up our history. So it's really cool that you've managed to kind of tie in language and this creative form of like drawing and illustration into the book that you've made.
mm. Thank you. And I also wanted to bring out some of the things through the illustrations that are part of our history too. Like
Mm.
driving down from the airport, you'd see, stalls on the roadside with women selling pineapples and things like that. So those images I wanted to show as well. Yeah.
That's really cool.
Letting people know where they can find the book.
Yeah, so there is a website in which operates from Fiji. It's called My Fiji Store. So if you go on My Fiji Store and you click on books, you will see Fiji Bath. Yeah,
Oh, cool.
yeah.
And we'll
I've exhausted my supply here in Australia, but
oh,
there's still a few copies in Fiji. But otherwise, you can find it on Google Reads. Good, yeah. You can find it on Amazon.
Okay.
Yeah,
is it
Okay, cool.
get a digital copy?
there is a digital copy on Amazon.
Oh, okay, cool. That's
Yeah.
good to know.
So if
Okay,
you just
cool.
search Fiji Bath on Google, the book, and it should show you where to find it. Yeah.
Mm. And where
Okay, that sounds good.
I don't know if it will spoil the second book, but are you allowed to know where the second book will be heading?
Probably June 2021. Yeah. So
Okay.
June of
Oh,
this year. Yeah.
wow.
Close.
Oh my goodness,
Close.
you must be very busy at the moment.
Okay, cool. Should we go on to our final question?
Yeah.
Yeah, you go for it, Isha.
Okay, cool. So just to wrap things up, but yeah, again, I just wanted to say like here like this is where we go with our thank yous and just like being with us here today and like sharing all that you have. Like honestly, Salvin, it's been really, really great. And like everything you have shared, whether it's like your family practices and being queer and then now having like this queer support group for Fijians, like it's all been really amazing.
Thank you.
And for Fiji Baat, the book, especially, I think like in relation to our like podcast, the one we're doing for Bad Fiji Gals, and you've talked about this, just like making things accessible for different people and like learning about our histories in different ways. Yeah, it's just been all like very cool. But is there anything else that you would like to share for the people who are listening that you're working on, or any other resources? Like you can use that time right now to share that.
Okay. So we've got Global Queer People of Fiji. If you're a queer person and you need support and you're listening to this podcast, or you know somebody who's queer and is from Fiji or has links to Fiji, please share this knowledge with them. They can join the group, and there are opportunities to share news and participate also in the Queer Dost program that we've got. We also run sessions online where we talk about HIV, PrEP, We talk about stigma, we talk about mental health, and where you can find support and what services are available for you if you're in Fiji and also around the world. The second thing I'd like to talk about quickly is I've been working in the background on doing podcasts as well. So very soon you might be able to see or listen to a podcast that I'm working on, and I'm trying to capture voices and narratives in Fiji Hindi as well.
Mm.
So I've got an interview that will probably come out, and it's a one about coming out, and it's one about accepting queer children in your families. So my hope and dream is that people who are, will be able to listen to these podcasts in their own languages.
Mm.
So I'm collaborating with a Tamil speaking man who lives who's from India, and a Malayalam speaking trans woman from Malaysia, and we're calling the podcast the Sangam Podcast. Um,
Cool.
yeah, so Sangam is really about collaboration, and so that's that. I don't think I have anything else to share. I think we've covered all the things in the conversation.
Okay, awesome. Kashil, do you want to add some final thoughts on your end?
I just think it's been a really beautiful podcast, being able to chat with you, and just wanted to say Vanaka Vakalevu for all the stories you've shared with us. I know for myself, it's just been really beautiful to hear those stories, and I know for other listeners, it'll be really amazing to hear that too. And thank you for being so generous with us too.
You're very welcome. I'd just like to say also thank you so much, Bahut Dhanbad and Vinaka Vakalevu, for the amazing work that you guys are doing. When I listened to to your podcast for the first time, and when you guys started with Hum log Aisha aur Kashel hai, and and you guys went on to say if Hum log uske tood dega, I was in my car and I was driving and I was cheering. I was like, this is fantastic. um, Amazing work. Like, this is really something that I was hoping for and looking forward to so much. And having me on, the podcast as well. Thanks so much. It's great. I'm really fortunate to be a part of this, and I wish you all the best. I know that you guys are working on another project, and you've got a GoFundMe. So, people who are listening to us as well, please go and support Aisha and Kashel, the Bad Fiji Girls. They're doing amazing work for all of us that our children will, come to reap the benefits of.